I definitely think the greatest equalizer has been the internet. And why I say that is because we kind of get to see how it can be done differently from different cultures. And also kind of just, everyone's free to make their own decisions, whereas in our parents' time, you can kind of see the similarities between different households. Like, no one's, not saying everyone's black experience is the same, but we have common truths. And even if like you're Jamaican or Nigerian, the responses from our parents are similar. And even though we're miles away in distance, the culture kind of glues us together. But then obviously it comes with its negativity where there's unrealistic expectations of what a man's capable of doing. This whole idea of, yeah, he's not a man if he goes 50-50 with you, or he doesn't pay all the bills and all of that. And it's just like, dude, it's not the same time, you know what I mean? And I think in a time where we're closer to equality than it was for our parents financially, it's like the same expectations can't still live in today's society, but we're seeing it live. And it's created this generation of what I've seen on the internet called incels and the rise of that. And I think that's prominent since the whole lockdown period. Where do you think that is rooted? And where do you think that start? Where did that start?
Well, I know that incel actually was started by a woman and who coined the term because, but it wasn't in the malicious way that it's been kind of taken upon it to be, being an involuntary celibate. And then it kind of died down and then it was picked up again by a group of angry young men who felt disenfranchised, felt like a lot of their privileges were being taken away from them and all this different stuff. Now, I feel like it is rooted in the lack of role models, the lack of positive role models in a family and in a community itself. And I do feel like it's a question around values and how values have changed in society and what that looks like for people. And I think that a lot of boys, there is a huge empathy gap because, there are elements of child development where children develop a stage or a level of empathy to be able to understand the emotions of another person. And when a lot of that empathy is directed from parent to child, but not made to be receptive back from child to parent, it becomes an issue as the child then grows older. The child then becomes manipulative. The child then becomes able to look and see how they can get out of particular situations. But then this also does lead to areas around incel behavior. And it's not just that, but just behavior where people are trying to get a one-up on people because this empathy gap is not really being developed and nurtured as kids. And that's for a multitude of reasons that I could go into on another point. But it's really telling to me that when it comes to this incel culture at the moment, and misery likes company, and there are a lot of young men out there who are extremely lonely, extremely sad, and extremely angry. And there isn't a lot of people who can kind of help to kind of nurture that and bring them back to a place. Because sometimes people are too far gone, sometimes people are inaccessible, and unfortunately this stuff leads to premature deaths and harming other people and doing all sorts of really malicious things in order to be heard and to be seen. Now, I'm not justifying any of what they do because I don't advocate for people harming other people, full stop, and I especially don't advocate for men harming women. I try to put the compassionate lens on to really understand what we're seeing now. And I think that there needs to be a community effort to be able to kind of really support these boys out of that psyche, out of that mentality. And we need to be very, very clear about what we are saying is required of men and what we are doing in the society. If a boy feels left behind in particular areas, and there's nobody there to support them to bring them up, whether that be in the education system, at home, in the local community, wherever, if all of the resources are being stripped away and taken away from them, and we're in a vicious cycle. If their fathers are present and in their life, but they're not receiving what they need from their fathers, or if they're at school and there's nobody that looks like them, being able to, and they feel that they could be cared for by teachers or pastoral care, then people are going to slip through the gaps. And I think it's so important that we figure out a way to really kind of create this safety net so they don't fall too far through the gaps. So we're all going to fall, but it's about how we feel safe when we do. And that's why I do the consultancy, that's why I do the podcast, and that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I continue to move in this direction, because I think that we need the support. We need the role models. We need the people there to be able to speak to these young boys before it gets too dark for them.
What you said is remind me of, I'm not sure if you know, across the pond, a guy called Jason Wilson.
Yes. Yeah. I love Jason Wilson. He's in my book. I mentioned him in my book.
Yeah, and I think what he's done, sometimes I could cry, like just watching his stuff. Just
Why don't you?
Huh?
Why don't you?
You know what? I probably have cried once or twice. I just can't remember, but I've definitely, and I think that's definitely something we should talk about. Why don't I cry? Why is it not something that just happens? I tend to find for myself anyway that my eyes water up. I know it wants to come out, but it doesn't, like, not at the level of, I've seen, let's say, women or kids. I can't cry to that level. I don't know. I feel like
that's interesting.
One thing in your book that I really like is about loving yourself. I think a lot has changed in my life when I started loving myself. What does loving yourself look like for you?
For me?
Yeah.
For me, loving myself really looks like accepting everything that I bring to the table. There are days when I'm miserable, when I'm grumpy, when I'm really harsh on myself. When I get into that space and I'm really debilitating and really insulting to myself and really just bashing me, like I have to do this, I'm a failure and all this different stuff. That is the antithesis of me loving myself. But at the same time, I think it's about accepting my flaws, but also really appreciating all the things that I do bring to the table. Being compassionate to when I do mess up, I'm just like, okay, cool. So you messed up this time. Doesn't make you a bad person. Doesn't make you a hateful, like, rotten human individual. This is me talking to myself. But how can we do better the next time? How can we do better in the next instance? What does that look like for you going forward? Just being able to talk to myself like I'm a friend to me. The way I would speak to my friends when they speak harshly about themselves, the way I speak to my siblings, the way I speak to my nieces and nephews, the way I speak to my cousins, my parents sometimes. Just being able to say, don't be so harsh on yourself. Like, it's not, it's not helpful, you being that harsh on yourself, because it's only you that you have. And I've seen it play out in my mom, I've seen it play out in my dad, I've seen it play out in uncles and aunties, I've seen it play out in cousins, and I've seen people speak so harshly to themselves. And I sat back and I thought, is that how I look when I'm speaking to myself like this? Like, is that how I look? Like, because I used to do a lot of self-deprecating jokes, like, trying to get there before anybody else did, sort of thing. And I never forget, a friend of a friend was like, no, we don't do that here. We don't do that here. And I was like, what do you mean we don't do that here? Like, I'm talking about myself, I'm not talking about you. And they said, no, we don't talk about ourselves like that. That's not what we do. And I was like, actually, and that kind of stuck with me. Of course, I was offended at first. I was like, how dare they tell me what I can and can't say about me? And then I sat on the tube home. Those tube journeys are very humbling, like when it goes through them stations. When you're by yourself and you're sitting there and you're thinking, and I thought to myself, actually, like, what is that about? What is that about? What is it that I believe about myself that has caused me to want to step in front of what I perceive other people see of me and lash out all the insults at myself before anybody else gets there? What is all that about? And that's when I started thinking about, I have to go through these mantras of, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself. And it's cheesy and it feels awkward and it feels like you shouldn't be doing it. And it feels like all of these really random things, right? But the more you say it, the more you end up believing it. You're like, I love myself, like, I love myself. I love myself, so I'm gonna pay for that thing because I want that, or I'm not gonna pay for that because I love where I'm coming from. You know what I mean? Like, it formulates your decisions. It really sets your values up and whatnot. So yeah, that's what I look at when I look at, you know, loving myself. But I always try to bring it to people, because there are days where I am not sitting in an actual loving space for me. And that's when I need my friends, and that's when I need my community to come and tell me and inject that back into me and remind me what that looks like for me.